Okay, over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Julie. Good evening, everyone. Sorry to have such a big turnout, as it might be desperation, let's hope not. I'm really delighted to welcome the panel because we've got three really diverse experiences of book promotion here. So we've got Kristen Fredrickson, who has self-published 3 books, but in 3 different ways. So hopefully she'll be able to share a bit with us about that. We've got Matthew Cockerell from Cookbook, who helps on sort of the book promotion side. And then we've got Emily Dewhurst from the Kitchen Press, who is a publisher, and I think publishes quite a few guild members. So we're giving the publishers angle on that. So welcome all of you. The way that I think this evening will work best is we're going to have a discussion, as Julie says, for about half an hour, and then I imagine that people have got lots of questions and maybe things to contribute to the to what we've already said. So then we'll move it over to questions fairly swiftly. So if you do have anything really burning, then put it in the box. If there's something that you haven't heard, you'll want clarifying in the moment, if you put that in the box as well. And Julie, feel free to interrupt us if it's something, you know, the statistic that someone said that you haven't heard. So without further ado, could I ask you all to introduce yourselves very briefly, starting with Kristen?
I am an American, as you can tell. I'm American British dual citizen. I've been here since 2005, and I've written and self-published 3 cookbooks since 2014. Yeah, I have 3 very different stories to tell, and quite a lot of wisdom. So yes, so that's me.
And Matt.
So yeah, I'm Matt Cockerell. My background combines a love of technology and a love of food, and I got involved in publishing and have spent the last few years helping to bring together what is something a bit like Spotify for cookbooks. And it is wonderful to see so many of the guild members on the call here who we've already been working with. And yeah, it's you know, great to see how that's working and to be able to share some of what we've been doing on book promotion.
And Emily.
Hello, I'm Emily Dewhurst from Kitchen Press. I'm the publisher at Kitchen Press, which has been running since 2011. We are very much an indie publisher in what is generally a big publisher game. We publish 2 or 3 titles a year, largely restaurant cookbooks, though we do branch out a little bit. We're very lucky to win a Guild of Food Writers, well, no, to be shortlisted for a Guild of Food Writers award a few years ago with our book, The Seafood Shack.
Wow.
And yeah, it's lovely to be here.
Thanks, everyone. I will be largely chairing this panel, but I have published a number of books with 2 different publishers and had quite different experiences of the promotion game. So I will occasionally chip in with my own experiences. One thing that I find interesting and comes up a lot when I'm talking to other authors about the experience being published is how much authors should expect in terms of publishers' help with promotion and how one manages those expectations and gets the most out of publishers. I don't know if, Emily, how it works with you guys.
Yeah, it is a very collaborative process. I mean, obviously, I'm talking from a very small publisher's point of view. So we have a really, really tiny budget. And when we started off, I don't know how helpful this is. When we started off, we didn't, you know, we didn't have any kind of outside PR support. So we did the whole thing ourselves. And now we do work with a PR company, but it's really, you know, they have a short contract for the launch of a book. So say a 3-month kind of thing. And then we take it on from there. So really what we want from an author is somebody who's also just really prepared to do the legwork and prepared to go to events. We will, you know, always, I suppose our main focus after press is probably trying to get people to events and festivals and to get them talking about their work. So yeah, it's very collaborative, but we do expect the author to be really, really involved because we're small and we have, you know, limited resources really.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to Sabrina Gayor on a podcast earlier this week because I was doing an event to promote one of her books. And one of the first things she said was, you got a book, you got to do the legwork, which is exactly what you've said. And I think a lot of us authors think, well, our job is writing. A few of us are quite sort of, we like to sit at our desk or in libraries or in our kitchens, and we don't really like going in front of big audiences. But I think that the expectation seems to be, certainly from my publishers, that, you know, it does have to be a teamwork.
Absolutely.
Thing. Kristen, how did you find it, given that you have self-published? I think you've done it. Can you just briefly go into how it worked for your 3 different titles?
Yeah, the first book that I did was I started writing it in 2007, and it was really a wish to distill my immediate family's memories and recipes into something lasting. And so I was very generously introduced to an agent by a friend, and I spoke to this agent and I was very, very excited. And she just really had to be honest and say, I can see that there's going to be an audience for your book, but it's very niche and it's very small. And I can't really, in good faith, try to represent you. So my best advice would be for you to self-publish. And at first that seemed like a real defeat. Like I thought, oh, that's not what I want to do. But as it turned out, for me to be able to control every single aspect of every word and every image and every piece of material that the book looked like eventually, for me to have absolute say over everything was extremely satisfying. And so what I did was, for the first book, was a Kickstarter campaign. And so I found out how much it was going to cost to pay a graphic designer and a printer. And luckily I had my teenage daughter as my photographer. And so she lived with us. And so I know. So every night when I cooked whatever I was cooking that day, she was there to photograph it. And she's a really good photographer. So I had a budget, and we set the budget for the Kickstarter campaign as what's called the goal. And then the Kickstarter campaign lasts for a month, where it was a full-time plus, like a full-time and a half job for me to manage the publicity of the Kickstarter campaign and to respond to every single person who donated.
So that's interesting.
And so
you had to start your publicity before you even really started work on the book, because you needed the funding. So that's it, because that ties into promotion afterwards.
Yeah, it was concurrent. So while I was committed to funding the project myself if it didn't work out, but I knew it was going to be really touch and go to have enough money. And so I thought, well, I'll write it and we'll photograph it as the Kickstarter campaign is being funded and see how healthy it gets. And so every day I was not only writing the book, but also managing this mass of hundreds of people who were saying, yes, I'll contribute the price of a book toward it eventually happening 6 months down the line. So it was an incredibly stressful amount of work to maintain the momentum and the excitement of these people who are saying, yeah, I want to see this book published. And in Kickstarter, if you don't achieve that goal, it's canceled. And everyone is just let go and nothing happens. So the pressure to make sure that this goal, of which I'll just say was just $10,000, could I make $10,000 in a month of people who wanted to see this book published? And at the end of the day, I made half again. I got half again that much in contributions. So,
and how did you go about publicizing the fact you were doing this project? Because that's very important. So you must have.
It was almost exclusively
to friends.
Yeah, it was almost exclusively Facebook. So because I'm not at the time I wasn't an Instagram person, and I've never been a Twitter person, but I'm a big Facebook person because I'm old. So so I just blitzed all of my friends on both sides of the Atlantic, and the pull of the book was that it was American recipes from my American life and British recipes from our English life. So I had kind of half and half on either side of the Atlantic, just really excited to see this book that they'd followed me doing on Facebook posts for years. So by the end of the month, so you got a month to blitz it on Kickstarter, and there was just a massive amount of fun and excitement and interest. And it was really heartwarming and brilliant. And when the book came out, everybody gets, and people were buying 8 or 10 or 12 or 16 copies
So you're
to give to.
You're pushing the sort of personal connection that people, because they knew you, they were, you know, happy to
Absolutely
buy more than one
and
copy.
people would say, well, and I would say, well, your blueberry cake recipe will be in it, you know, and the party that you were at when we were children will have a photograph, you know, in it. And so it was an extremely personal thing. So the agent was completely right. She could not have sold this to anyone, but I was able to actually fund it, and more so. So by the time when the book was actually published, we had more than broken even. And there was this incredible sense of excitement. So I'll fast forward to the second book. I didn't do a Kickstarter campaign, and I could not regret it more. It was just, I just waited and wrote the book, and you know, it sold to the same people, but there was not that sense of momentum and community and excitement. So the biggest lesson to me was, yes, it was the hardest 5 to 6 weeks of my publishing or my writing career, was to maintain this community, but it more than paid off, both in money, but also in my sense of excitement about the project. And so the book appeared, and they just flew to all corners of the world for these people who've been so excited about it. So it was an incredibly rewarding experience.
So it does sound like, for people that are thinking of self-publishing, actually raising the money is not only a good way financially to do it, but actually also is a great publicity tool, because people are really investing in the projects, and, you know, you're getting their money before.
Well, that's right. And one of the, they're called, yeah, on Kickstarter, it's called rewards. So your reward can be something like 1 copy, you know, or your reward can be, and I offered these, I thought, outlandish rewards, but people did them, were things like, I'll come to your house in New York and cook dinner for 8 people. And you can pick recipes from the book, and I'll give you the list of recipes. And I did that just out of craziness. And everyone that I offered, somebody did it. And it was this, to me, massive amount of money. It wasn't that much money, but I felt like toward my project, it was a lot of money. And then at any point in the near future, when I was on that side of the Atlantic, I would turn up in New York and cook dinner for their 8 friends. So it was incredibly just fun, and the community spirit of it. And then those people would then also buy, you know, a copy of the book for everyone who came to that dinner. So it was really, Kickstarter is really a lot of fun. So I would say, as you say, it's not just the money, it's the sense of everyone's building toward this goal, that we're all part of this team to make this book happen. And everyone knew that if the money didn't come through, there would be no book. So it's a brilliant tool, not only for the money, but it gives, because writing your cookbook and self-publishing can be really isolating feeling. There's no team behind you. There's nobody rah-rahing in the distance. You have to maintain all this excitement on your own. But the Kickstarter campaign makes every day something's happening that you have to reply to, and you have to thank people for their support. And so the day that the campaign ended and we were at $16,000 when I'd asked for 10, it was just the best day. And then
real vote of confidence in the project. Yeah. Matt, at what stage do you work with authors?
Well, I was just going to chip in on the crowdfunding side of things, because we've got 2 experiences of that. I mean, one is the way in which it helped Cookbook get started on Kickstarter as well. And I think there is a lot to be said there for the momentum and building that kind of community. And that really worked for us quite well. But then we also work with Unbound. And I don't know and we've got several books which have come from Unbound. We also have our Chief Operating Officer, Jason Cooper, who came to us from Unbound as well. But what they do is specifically a kind of Kickstarter around books. And so we've got the Jonathan, what's that one? The Plagiarist in the Kitchen, Jonathan Mead's.
Yeah.
That was an Unbound book, for example. So I was just going to definitely say, I see how, in terms of getting your initial marketing going, building something like that where people have buy-in to making a success of the book is helpful. I mean, the other thing I was going to say is that when we really first got started in terms of where could we find the first people who would bring books and to the platform, and we knew that we'd first of all start with being able to get some classics, which would be a bit maybe either out of print or older books, and those are books which, in terms of promotion, publishers were sort of not doing anything, and authors were feeling quite forgotten about. So we were very much okay, well, these clearly there's just going to be a big benefit if we can find ways to make these classic books visible when they're being neglected by all the traditional channels. And I think what's been interesting is that over time, what we've realized is that whether you are a self-published author or an author whose books are still in print, but they're backlist books, or even increasingly, we're finding that even if you're a traditionally published author and you have a brand new book, there are still so many ways in which the author needs to actively or is expected to actively get involved in promoting the book, and through as many channels as possible. And those channels now include things like podcasts, and it's not simply literary festivals and going to bookshops. And so the podcast circuit clearly plays a big role now. And then what we can do is, when we do work with publishers like Kitchen Press and like Nourish, who published Nishikatona, for example, is really and also Daniel Golmish. We've done a lot, for example, with Daniel Golmish doing a kind of cook along where he talked to Claire Bosey. And and what we're really finding is it almost doesn't matter which stage your book is at, figuring out ways and channels through which the authors can reach different communities, and I suppose using the online things like podcasts and some of the events which we do does have that advantage of the sort of broader reach. It's kind of an international reach, and there's a finite number of places you can physically go, but you can reach another audience.
And do authors generally come to you through their publishers, or do authors ever get in contact and say, I've got this title that is on your site, and can we do something together?
It's interesting. I suppose in terms of bringing the whole licensing together, we often do reach out to authors who then reach out to their publishers. There's always been that tandem mixture. I would say in the case of working with Emily at Kitchen Press, because we've been working for some time, there's a very much a sort of joint activity with the publisher there, saying, great, what are these new books coming up? Oh, can you put us in touch with the authors? And we can do something like that. In other cases, there might be a big, somewhat anonymous publisher, and we'll reach out to the authors and say, can we do something? And as you say, sometimes vice versa. So it depends on the publisher as to how we work, and whether it's more driven by working with the publisher or whether we work directly with the author. I mean,
because from my point of view, certainly with my first publisher, it was more of a case of me identifying promotional opportunities for myself. My current publisher actually is very, very proactive, and I feel lucky. But there's obviously the collaborations that you've mentioned, Matt, but I'm thinking things like podcasts are quite big. Emily, would you have any advice on things that authors you think work well for authors in terms of promotion?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of, like, when we started out, actually, and I know Facebook, it's interesting hearing Kristen talking about Facebook. It's maybe not quite obviously the landscape has changed a bit. But we very much, actually, as publishers, as much as the author, during the process of pulling the book together, would put a lot of kind of recipe testing up there, and we would encourage the authors to do so as well. So especially when we're working with restaurants particularly, they're really talking to an engaged audience anyway, who are invested in it and are loving seeing, what's going to be in the book and the whole process.
So this is very much pre-publication that you're building excitement, and you think it's worthwhile, not being all secretive, because sometimes you see people going, oh, I can then finally announce that I'm doing this book, and they're 3 weeks out from publication.
I mean,
it's better to
secrets they're all very nice, but actually I think whether you're doing it through Kickstarter or whatever, really what you're trying to do with the book is build a community who are really wanting to engage with it, and who there's something so personal about cookbooks. I think maybe it's true of I don't think it is as true of fiction. It's something that it's so active, the way people kind of participate in cookbooks and the way that they connect with them, that I would say, you need to start communicating that from the word go, really.
Have you ever worked with authors who have brought their own PR? Because I know that some authors are lucky enough to be able to afford to employ a PR. do you know, would you say that that's useful?
we've never done it. I mean, I've never had that experience. And I was talking to an author recently who was wondering whether it was worth it. And I suppose all I would say is, I think you have to be really clear about what you want out of the PR. And I think a lot of PRs charge an awful lot of money for, you know, it's a dark art, PR, really. There's nothing certain in it at all. And I think if you're with a publisher who tries quite hard to promote books, I mean, if you're really disappointed in what they're doing and you don't feel like they're making any effort or kind of even pursuing kind of obvious routes, then sure. But if it's possible that, you know, sometimes it just doesn't land with the press for whatever reason. And so you have to sort of look at other ways of doing it, whether that's sort of more local press or more local events, or look at a different. And I don't always feel that paying a PR person is necessarily going to
I think
do anything new. If you want to go on TV, then find a PR person who knows how to do on TV. I think that's pretty reasonable. But yeah, I'd be a little bit wary maybe.
Yeah, and I would say that certainly it's useful to think, like, I know a lot of guild members also work in the journalism area, and thinking like a journalist in terms of what particular time of year or festival or hook is my book relevant to, and might I be able to, you know, sell it into Delicious for a little mention or a feature or a roundup or something, or make the newspapers and etc. And I think that if you do find that your publishers, you know, don't have the bandwidth to be thinking of every single angle, it's worth going. I mean, I'm assuming that your sort of publicity and marketing team you'd appreciate it when authors come to them with ideas, as opposed to
very much. I mean, basically our team is me and my partner, so yes, we really like it. We really like it. And I think and we would just and I think the best person, this is such an obvious statement, I'm sorry, but you know, the best person to sell a book really and to sell it to press is the author, actually. And like you say, kind of spotting angles and just being proactive like that.
And how, Kristen, how did you go about getting endorsements for your book? And do you think that
it was so I've done the two. So the first was published in, I got these right. The first was published in 2014, 15. And I had not yet joined the guild. And so I went to, just personally, I just went to authors that I really respected, and I found their agent and I sent them a PDF of part of the book. And I said, in like probably too much detail, how much I loved their books. And I went to people that I had genuine passion for. And so it wasn't hard to express myself. And to a person, I was just so surprised, but to a person, each one of them said, yes, I'd love to see more of the recipe list and maybe your introduction. And so then I sent more to them, and I had 4 endorsements on the first book that were not food people. They were more novelists and memoirists and people that, but the novelists were people who wrote about food in their novels. And so that was a really good
That's an interesting angle as well, because I picked up a novel the other day that had a Nigella Lawson quote on the front. So it's clear that
that's right. There's a huge crossover.
People recognize the name and respect the person in their sphere, then, you know, it's not necessarily that you need to get a food person to have a quote, as long as it's not something ridiculous like Nadine Dorris or something, like someone that's got a little bit of a link to writing, perhaps, and culture.
No, I chose people that I think that I knew were within my circle of people that I admired, and that the people I knew would want to buy my book would look at it and think, oh, I love him or I love her. So, and then for the second one, by then I had joined the guild, and there were a number of people then who were in the food writing world who I thought that person's endorsement would speak to the people that I know want to buy this book. And they were the second group of endorsers were more food writing, but again, they were people that I knew, that I cared about their writing. So I went to them and said, would you consider reading an excerpt from this book? And I sent to them, if they asked, I sent them my first book and said, this is going to be just like it, only volume 2. And in fact, the second book was called Second Helpings. So it was just, it was more of the same idea. And again, the people that I cared about and that I could speak passionately to said, yes, I'd like to see more of your writing. And then they did endorse it. So I've never gone for anybody that I personally in my heart didn't feel passionate about. And I think that probably translates into my request, right? So they can feel that I feel that's going to reflect the character of my book is the list of people who say, I enjoy cooking from this, or I have this on my shelf. So it's been a very personal, and it's not that I had, for the first time, I didn't have personal contacts for these people at all. I just went through the channel of their official agents, and it's not hard to find the agents of people that you admire, and then you just go for it, and it, so that's how it worked for me.
I'm just going to butt in here because Marcus has just put that he's never had any endorsements in his books. And do you think they're important? So I didn't know the rest of the panel wanted to comment on them.
Certainly, I'll quickly say that I don't think they're vital, but I think that they are. There's so many books published every single year that the chances of someone sort of picking it up and thinking, oh, so, Orlando Murrin or Ruby Tando or someone has said that it's good and I like their work. I just think it's not vital, but it helps. And I would say that it is a bit of legwork. I didn't send mine out to that many people, but I wrote, personal handwritten cards with every single one, because I think that a fountain pen goes a long way these days. And I think that helps rather than just doing a blanket, publisher sending out something with a printed sheet. But I don't know what everyone else thinks about the power of endorsements and whether they're useful.
I definitely think, the personal, I think if you need to have some kind of personal connection to it. I mean, I do wonder about it sometimes, but I think it also helps with bookshops, actually. I think bookshops like to see a book that's got other names on it. I also think you can have too many of them, though. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes I see a book with about 10 endorsements on the back, and you're like, I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't ring true. So I think they need to ring true, really. And one or two really strong ones, I think, do help.
There are various forms of endorsement as well, I guess, not just on the cover, but we've noticed it's great when I think several of the kitchen press books like Bad Girl Bakery get feature in Nigella's Cookbook Corner. And that's always,
It was lovely.
And presumably something like that has an effect on sales if it's
as a publisher, I don't think, especially as a really tiny publisher, I mean, I'm sure it's different for bigger ones, but for us, there actually there aren't that many things that you can see immediately on Amazon just absolutely suddenly shifting loads and loads of numbers. And Nigella's one of them. The Food Show is another one. Or a really juicy bit of press in Observer Food Monthly. I mean, I think those are the ones that really see. And then interestingly, I was just seeing on the messages, Elaine saying about not ignoring local press. And I have to admit, actually getting a really, really good bit of local press, obviously it's not like Nigella mentioning it on her website, but actually it could make a really big much more of an impact actually on local sales.
That's
than
interesting.
a kind of a little piece in, I don't know, Delicious or,
That
is interesting that, sorry, Felicity. I was going to say that that the one downside to the Kickstarter campaign is that once it's over, I had this really erroneous feeling that my work was done. Whereas the follow-up would have been to do lots more with local press or local bookshops, which I did a little bit of, but occasionally somebody would come forward and say, can I include one of your recipes in a Waitrose weekend or Delicious or BBC Good Food or something? And then I would just see actual sales, and I thought, why am I not doing more of this?
Yeah.
But it's just so exhausting. But I could trace, because if you're doing your own, if you have your own personal Amazon page, you see every single sale.
Yeah.
And so I could see that someone had mentioned it in an article, or had shown a picture of the book or whatever, and I could track actual dozens of sales to that appearance. And so it's
so that's
definitely
useful.
vitally so
That's
important.
a really
but
useful tool, because obviously most of us don't have that as a metric, but it's, you know, it's fascinating to be able to see what works in real time.
Oh, completely. I mean, you can see it in real time. Like you can see it in 24 hours or 48 hours of a piece appearing. And then one of the novelists that I asked to write in America, we call them blurb, but an endorsement on my first book. Then when her next book came out, she included one of my recipes and did a little thing about where you could find my book. And then she did her publicity for her novel. And then it trickled down that the people who bought her novel then went on to Amazon and bought my book. So it's this thing where, I mean, it's obviously small. It's not Nigella, it's not anything massive, but to me, in my personal world of the people that I cared about and the work that I cared about, those people went on to, in a very small and controlled way, but say things about my work. And then I could see actual books flying out of Amazon as a result of these very specific things, which were very much worthwhile, saying to those people, thank you so much for including my book in Waitrose Weekend or whatever. So you know, it's not massive, but on my small scale, it was not only helpful and trackable, but added tremendously in my sense of this book was important to me, and this was something that was worth my doing. So yes.
Lastly, before we move over to the questions, because I'm sure there are a lot, I was wondering what you all thought about the value of sort of physical events. I'm someone that will, if a bookshop asks me to go and do a signing and a talk, or a festival asks, then I will say yes, because you just think even if you only sell a couple of books, it goes into people's minds and they maybe put you on their Christmas list or whatever. But I mean, do you think that it's worthwhile? Because it can take up a lot of time, and especially if you're working full time, you know, herring off to here, there and everywhere for the weekend to sell a few books might not be your first choice of activity.
And they're often not terribly well paid, turning up at festivals, that's for sure. Exactly.
Paid at all.
But I totally agree. I just think it's worth it. And sometimes you hit those events where loads of people want to buy it and they talk to you, and you know, and it's I do think it's really important. And occasionally you do get authors, I've just checked the list, I don't think any of them are here, so that's good, who just sort of say, right, well, I've done my bit now, and you know, I feel like I've put enough time into it. And really, you're kind of like, well, you know, that means we've probably sold all the books we're going to sell too, because it's the thing that keeps it alive. Once, you know, there's a limit to how much press you're going to get for a book anyway. You know, after 6 months, it's much harder to get any more sort of PR for it. So really, that's when festivals and bookshops rely on authors coming in, and you know, always so you know, they love having signed books on their shelves. So that
should authors when they're in a bookshop, should they ask whether the bookshop would like them to sign their books? Because I'm definitely embarrassed to do this, and
I'm sure it's mortifying, but you should definitely do it anyway. And sometimes then they put lovely stickers on the front saying it's a signed copy. And also what authors should do, and publishers and everybody, is rearrange the bookshelves when they're in there to make sure their books are facing out every time.
Obviously, I have never done that myself.
I mean, I know.
Matt, do you do physical events with Cookbook as well, or is everything digital?
It's floating around as a potential future idea. I mean, our main growth phase happened during the pandemic, so it was all a bit funny in that sense. But we're looking at opportunities to do something physical. But on the other hand, I was just going to say, in terms of things which move the needle, if you having a balance and having other things which you know, can reach bigger numbers is obviously useful. And one thing we get every month, we see, Google tells us what was the biggest growing kind of recipe. And it nearly always corresponds with, oh, you Google and look around to say what happened last month around this recipe, and it tends to have been something on TV in the UK. And so I'm kind of interested in that in terms of where that bar is at, and if you're not already a TV name, what are different possibilities that can sometimes lead to some visibility. Because I think it still is the case, however much all these other things have sprung up, that you can reach a lot of people there. And we know, like, people who like cookbooks, Saturday Kitchen does get lots of coverage. The question is, if you're not, Ken Hom, who's on our site, is often on there, and various other people. And there's some things about old books. There was someone who works at the Carved Angel, and when they were there, I forget the name, but she mentioned a book for a recipe which is in the Carved Angel cookery book from Joyce Molyneux years and years ago. But that suddenly got like 1,000 clicks onto it.
Yeah.
If you can find a route, it's even more of a dark art, I guess, than getting into the Observer Food Monthly, but it makes a difference.
I once had a cookbook deal that was subject to a very large boost if I managed to find myself on primetime TV. It's like, I don't think that's going to happen, but it's nice to know that I'm worth a lot more if I'm on primetime TV. Very quickly, because I know that we are going to go to questions, but I would say that also two things that I did recently that are very silly, but actually I think to some extent helped in terms of publicity and putting yourself as a brand is the wrong word, but just establishing yourself and your book in people's minds was I got a couple of themed t-shirts that I could wear to publicity events. I got this ridiculous one because my latest book was about breakfast. I got this ridiculous Sarah Lucas style one with 2 fried eggs on it, which I don't know how my publisher felt about that. And an oatcake, Staffordshire oatcakes one, which I wore when I went on Radio 4, which obviously was unhelpful because Radio 4 is the radio station. And I also, because I put this dog on social media as well, I got a little stamp with his paw print in, and you'd be amazed at how many people, when they want a book signed, also ask if they can have the dog's paw print. So
oh my God,
ridiculous things, but actually, sometimes you have to think stupidly for these things. Anyway, should we go to questions? Because I'm sure there will be lots. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, I don't think it's ridiculous. Of course, everybody knows that Will's more important than you.
Yeah, sad acknowledgement.
Simon Wright, you had a question. I shall unmute you. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to know if anyone has tried using these print-on-demand type packages, and if so, what their experience was.
Oh, I haven't. I don't know if anyone in the audience has, because that's not what you did, is it, Kristen? That's a bit different.
it isn't. It's but I wish that Jenny Ridgewell were here. Is Jenny Ridgewell in our audience? She's had a really successful go with her book about school teaching for schools in the 1970s, which is an incredible memoir, and I'm pretty sure it's print on demand. The problem being that you can't control the quality. It's the paper quality, and I mean, maybe there are choices, but when I knew when I did mine that I wanted it to be kind of fancy, so I didn't want to do print on demand. But I think that is so practical for so many people who don't want a backlog of things sitting in a warehouse or wherever you have to house your books. Oh, I wish Jenny were here.
I'd be interested to know the lead time on that as well. If someone.
I think it's instant. I think it's instant.
Oh wow. Okay.
Well, it's interesting now. I've actually, this is not cookbook related, just ordered a print on demand book for my daughter. It takes kind of 3 weeks to come, and that that is, it's kind of, it's off-putting. And the only other, I mean, we've never done anything like that. There was a great book that came out quite a while ago now called The Gaza Kitchen, which was an American book. It's a really wonderful book. And it was print on demand. And as you say, though the book is unbelievably good, really so good, the quality was appalling. And I mean, the print quality was okay. Like, the resolution and everything fell to pieces really, really quickly. And so I mean, and maybe that's improved because that was some time ago now. I don't know, 8 years or something.
Sounds like Simon.
But you can't
contact with Jenny and see what her experience is, because maybe things moved on, hopefully.
Well, I think one of the things about that is that you can't have illustrations. Can you? I'm not sure how that works. I don't know. We'd have to ask. Maybe you could have drawings, but I don't know how you do high quality photographs in a print on demand. I really don't. And that was important to me, so I didn't.
I actually got sent this sample, which is created by HP, I think, with a project they were doing with online creators who didn't have publishing deals. And they did various different kind of bindings and things. And this, I mean, I've got different experiences of different online, different POD technologies. But yeah, this one's actually, you know, not terrible, I would say, but obviously getting the proofing right and all those things, you absolutely have to be on top of everything there. So
but once you've done that, it's print on demand. And so then, you know, once you've put that legwork in, then, you know, you don't have to, as Kristen said, pay for a load to sit in a warehouse or whatever. You're only paying for those that are actually selling. So that's an interesting thing, because that looked good quality from what I could see of that, Matt.
Yeah, and certainly for people, it all depends on what your ambitions are, because it's very, very good if you think you might only actually end up getting rid of if a little family project where there's going to be 10 people buying it or 100 people. But it's a bit of a balancing act between because once you're at the threshold where you can maybe do it more traditionally, the economics. I mean, the other thing about the economics is the price which the user has to pay typically ends up being more when it's print on demand, right? The overall costs are higher, so it's a balance. But it is there, and that Amazon makes it pretty easy with its Kindle Direct Publishing, where you can do a pure ebook or you can do it with hardback or paperback. So I've got a little bit of non-cookbook experience working with that, and it was okay. It wasn't brilliant quality.
There's an interesting comment from Liz Wright in the chat. It says, a friend used print on demand, and you really must have a very good proofreader, as they make out that they are publishers, but they don't do any of the publishers things.
No,
So,
they take a PDF. From what I understand, they take your PDF that's absolutely set in stone, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so whatever mistakes you've made are going to come out.
Yeah, I think they are just printers, aren't they, really? Are there any other questions?
We've got a question from Linda Tubby. I shall unmute you, Linda.
Okay. Yeah, I've had 6 books published over the years from 2000 to 2015, and the recent 2 I quite like to reissue. The publisher has changed from Kyle Cathy to whoever bought her out, and I'd quite like to republish, self-publish, or whatever. And I wondered if there was any advice, for material that's already there. I want to possibly add little bits and take bits away, maybe do a bit more photography, change the cover, change the title. Any advice?
In terms of your legal situation, or?
Not so much that, because I kind of know that. It's just, is it a good idea? It's a bit of a silly question, really, because it depends on the book. But I've had encouragement.
There's something that could be done differently because presumably if these are backlist titles, then unless you're very fortunate, they're sort of chugging along rather than selling.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think it's something that can be done to sort of, give them a new life, let us say? Yeah,
just to get it moving, really. Just sort of, and if it's actually worthwhile doing that. Anybody had any experience of that, moving from one publisher to another?
Can I just ask, Linda, whether
Heather, hello.
Heather, hello. Sorry, I've got this very strange sort of speaker thing attached to my laptop, so thank God at least I now know it works. I mean, have the publishing rights have reverted to you? Have they?
Yes, I have copyright, but obviously I've got to have agreement from the photographer. I've got to look into the person who designed it, I've got to work that out, because I don't really want to have to, apart from possibly the photographer, I don't want to have to pay for anything else if I'm republishing. Or is that really mean of me? I don't know.
Someone just put up in a message, I'm sorry, I didn't see who it was, but they said that they'd worked with a designer and photographer to you know, to extend the book, to create the new book effectively, because that's presumably what you'd want to do, because you'd want the same designer and the same photographer.
Yeah, I
and
mean, I don't want to change the page layout, you know, I'm happy with that, but possibly a new cover would, yeah. Anyway, it's just, I'm throwing it out there. I don't,
what I was just going to mention is that with reverted rights, Cookbook works with many authors of reverted rights, where they will you know, work with us to make the book available on Cookbook, and sometimes then go ahead to also make it available for sale as a Kindle book, and in some cases also do print with another publisher or self-published, either way. And that's great. There's many examples of that. The one thing I'd also recommend, though, is if you, especially for people who self-publish, keeping high-res copies of the files. It's so frequent that you find someone who is self-published and they got 1,000 copies printed or whatever, and the printer no longer exists, and they discover that the only PDF they have of this book is like really low resolution, and the files are nowhere. And publishers,
that's not, that's so not a problem. I can get that, actually. That's not a problem, but thank you for that. That's a useful bit of information, actually.
Interesting. Good luck.
Anyway.
Thank you. Anthony Gladman, is there an Anthony Gladman here? There's a question in the box, but I can't see.
I'm here.
Oh yeah, there we are.
Yeah, I was just interested in the idea of getting people engaged and building excitement in the run-up to publication while you're working on the book, and you know, sharing some of the content in order to do that. I'm just wondering how much could you share? Obviously you don't want to give away too much, but you want to give away enough to build excitement, and if there's any particular kind of material that gets people most engaged.
Could I just answer that, because how do you do, Anthony? My colleague Ellie James works with you. Our agency represents you. I mean, I just need to red alert you on that, whatever anyone else would like to say, that you do have to be very, very careful until a book has been published, because there are issues about first serial and second serial, and if content has been out in the marketplace already, the publishers can't then achieve a first serial for you, because they can't say this is fantastic new fresh material. So just to sort of, perhaps you could just have a chat with Ellie tomorrow about this, but just to alert you on that, because
well, I wasn't thinking actually I was thinking more like you know, not the actual book, but if I'm sharing so it's a book about gin that I'm writing, so if I'm sharing people which samples I'm tasting tonight, that kind of thing, or if I'm including a cocktail in the book, if I include some extra stuff beyond what I'm going to write in the book, if I share something about that and then say, you know, I'll also be covering this in the book, is that the kind of thing?
I would say, from my point of view, I think it was really helpful to drop, as said, nothing that, you know, not actual material from the book, but, you know, if I were traveling, if I were recipe testing, then I would always put them online. And, you know, I think it's embarrassing sometimes people say, this is from my forthcoming book, and you feel like you're blowing your own trumpet, but you have to, blow your own trumpet. And, you know, if there's a, you know, do a little hashtag so you can find them all together. And then when you're doing stuff, you know, for the book, you say you can find everything at this hashtag. And I would say that it's a really great idea just to let people know that you're writing, and to hopefully get some pre-orders in.
I agree.
That anyone else got anything to
Absolutely, I would agree too. And I think even putting stuff up like, you know, I mean, you know, disasters you're having, recipe testing, or things not working out right. I mean, they love it. They love it.
Yeah,
or,
absolutely.
I don't know, just sort of ecosystem around the material in the book, really.
Yeah,
isn't that the funniest thing? It's, I'm thinking, Emily, that's true, that the most popular things I've ever said on social media is when I've cocked something up, and it's just gone horribly wrong, especially if I'm testing it and I'm thinking, well, like boudin blanc or pork pie or whatever, and I've done several versions, and then I put up that, well, this just was a disaster, and nothing makes my reading public happier than to see that I've done something really, really awful. And everybody always chimes in and says, I didn't think you ever made a mistake, and this is so encouraging. And so I think that's really pleasant for everybody, because you feel human to them, and then they join in and say, well, I've made it myself and here's what went wrong. So I think that's a fantastic suggestion.
Yeah, and it is, again, it's just thinking slightly outside the box and not feeling like you're, you know, just a slick publicity machine, but actually you're right, building, you know, the narrative. And if there's if the book is going to be about gin, but you've got some stories to share about, you know, your own relationship to gin, or, you know, where you first tasted, how first you fell in love with it, it won't necessarily go in the book. And I think people really like that, because it's sort of a peek inside behind the scenes almost, or, you know, your gin collection or your favorite cocktail shaker or whatever.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I'm just trying to see if we've got anything else in the questions. Just little tips where people have been saying they've been sharing reels on Instagram in advance. There's no more. There's no more actual questions. Let me have a look. Oh, here we go. One's just popped up. So, who was that? Angela. Angela, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, hi, thank you. So many tips and useful bits of advice, and I've never considered self-publishing, but this chat has made me sort of consider maybe a different route. But it seems to be a lot about social media numbers and numbers of followers, for example. And I know that seems to be very important when considering down the publishing route, but what about self-publishing? Is it just as important?
Oh gosh, well, as the representative self-publishing here, I don't have a lot of numbers, but my numbers are really passionate about it. So it's not like I don't have random people who don't care. What I have is a core group of people who care a lot. And so when something happens, so you maintain that group, you maintain that community, because whatever you do or say, they're going to be interested in it. So it's not about attracting strangers, it's about maintaining and cultivating the group of people that already care and would cook anything you talked about because they've cooked all the other stuff you've talked about. So I would say you'd have to choose between numbers and quality, I guess. So for in terms of my self-publishing, it's just been that I could count on a community of hardened criminals who just follow whatever I do, as opposed to thousands and thousands of people who don't know and are just cruising around. So I think that's the choice, I guess.
And I wouldn't say in general that, and Emily, you can confirm or deny this, but people talk a lot about how you're never going to get a publishing deal and you're never going to sell any books if you don't have this many followers on social media. And I get the sense from having talked to other people that it's helpful, but it's not the be all and end all if you've got a strong book idea that has a market.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I kind of, you know, I would definitely, I mean, it's not really the way that we work anyway, but I would be quite wary of just getting a book with somebody because they had 100,000 followers. And especially, actually, what Kristen's saying is really, really true. It's much more important to have, you know, people who are actually engaging with that and who are into it, you know, and who are wanting to talk to whoever. I think, yeah, I don't know. It's not really, I suppose it's just not really our bag. People who've got loads and loads of followers, is just kind of not how we do it, certainly.
Yeah, I think building it organically and you know, having an engaged community is more helpful than, as Kristen said, having hundreds of thousands of people that actually just won't translate into book sales. I think
Exactly.
I'm right in saying that some of these social media people that have had book deals, not necessarily in the cookbook sphere, but actually they haven't sold that many, just because that is not an audience that is buying a lot of books. You know, they're buying some books, they're not necessarily buying it from everyone they follow on TikTok. So, you know, it's not, I think that we're sometimes a bit melancholy about it, and we don't need to be, is my hope.
Well, I think too that I think people who buy cookbooks, especially, I would have said, are, well, maybe not all cookbooks, but the kind of cookbooks that I write that are kind of memoir based or story based, are they're buying the story. They're buying a world that they want to inhabit for that period of time. They're not there to get one recipe. Either they're going to inhabit that world. So if you can cultivate that world, who's interested in your world and your community, they'll buy the next thing that you do, because they want the next sequel. You know, they want the next installment of that community. So I think it's a long game. You know, it's not a short game. It's something that you invest an awful lot of time and effort and truth into, but then once you've established that community, they're there for whatever you produce. So I think that's
and word of mouth, I think, is so powerful. And obviously that works to some extent on social media, but having someone say, oh my God, you know, do you follow this person, or have you got this book, or whatever, is so much more useful than just trying to build followers in some artificial way, I would say.
Totally.
Ruth Neiman wanted to ask a question related back to what we were talking about earlier about promoting before your book is out. Do you want to unmute yourself? There we go.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
I've actually done both. I've self-published and I've had a publisher, and they are incredibly different experiences in both promoting and just in the way I did it. I did Indiegogo actually, Kristen, which you do get the money whether you raise the full amount or not. But you are totally right. It is an absolute full-time job while you're doing it, and really, really hard work. But you know, it did work for me, so, and it obviously worked for you. So there are quite a few pluses in it. But I wanted to go back to the about publicizing pre-publishing, because I actually heard from somebody that you're not supposed to publish your recipes or photographs online or social media or wherever if you've got a publisher, because the material, as Heather said, is already out there. So I was a bit confused as to what you can and cannot do.
I wouldn't ever recommend putting up recipes that are going to be in the book, or photographs that are necessarily going to be in the book. You know, I would take photographs of something and say, this is a recipe that's going to be in my book, but I wouldn't put the actual material that's going to be, I mean, a lot of my stuff is already online for free anyway with the Guardian, so, and people still buy the book, but yeah, I would just say, you know, my own picture and my description, you know, this is a hog's pudding, that, you know, hog's pudding testing for the book, and a snippet about the hog's pudding, which isn't the text that's from the book, but it's just from my own brain talking about hog's pudding, would be how I would do it.
I think it is really about kind of about being more than the book. You're sort of contextualizing it. So I think if you are, I mean, there's the kind of legal side of it, but also that's kind of just boring. And you know, if you're not getting anything extra, all you're getting is what you're going to get in the book. So I think that's probably the way to think about it. What can you build around it? What kind of extra can you give to people that interests them in what's actually inside the book?
But talking about the actual recipe that you are going to perhaps put in the book, you know, and talking about the recipe, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think so.
And also it means,
well, does it depend? Sorry, does it depend if you're a self-publisher where you own the copyright to everything anyway, or if you've got a publisher who can tell you what you can and can't share?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think the same would stand, wouldn't it? Because really, it's about how you're promoting what's in the book, and you still. In a way, I don't think it is just a legal issue. Really, I think it's about effectively promoting, and they're two very different things, really. What you're doing on social media and what you're able to do in a book. So really making the most out of the fact that those are really quite different different kind of media, really.
I think that's a really good point. And also using it as, if you're talking around the book and, you know, adding extra material, in that sense, then it means it's got a longer shelf life than just promoting the book before publication. Because if you kind of hashtag it right, or whatever medium you're using, then people can go to it when they bought the book and see. And people often say to me, I went right back through your Instagram feed to look at all the photos of you doing this and that, and it was great. And because there are no photographs in most of my books, it's actually quite useful to have that as a little extra that people can go and have. So I think it's about using different media for, you know, for their strengths.
And Natasha put in the comments that she was always told by the publisher that they had the right to tease actual recipes through the press, but not on social media, on her social media. Has that changed?
I don't know. Sorry, I should know the answer to that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I wouldn't be happy. I don't think anybody at Kitchen Press would be happy if an author was putting entire recipes up on their social media. But I would be delighted if they're talking about their work on social media and getting people interested in it. So I think that's the difference, really.
It's interesting what Felicity said about her books often not having photography, but then having photos on social media. In some cases, we actually link those two worlds. So Annie Gray's got a book on Christmas, which is just going onto the site. It doesn't have any photos. It's a sort of more of a sort of history book. But actually, she has been doing what Felicity talked about in terms of on the way, all the way through her Instagram feed while she was working on the book. She shared all these amazing kind of things. And so we can actually connect those up. So, you know, when you do look at one of the recipes, which in print doesn't have that, we make that digital connection to be able to show, oh, this was the making of this thing. So yeah, there are sort of, as you say, the benefits of doing that run-up work while you're working on a book can then continue down the line to make more of the book when it is published.
And also once it's published, you know, once it's kind of gone off the publicity roster and it's a backlist title, my publishers, and actually in the Guardian as well, are always very good at, if someone writes to me and says, can we include your recipe in this book or this on this website or whatever, you know, in return for a book credit, they always say yes. And I think that's a really great way, again, of sort of just, it's using your material, you know, sometimes with payment, sometimes without payment, but it's, you know, it's getting out there again. But that's obviously once it's published, so it's slightly different legally. Any other questions, or are we?
There's one from Frida about owning copyright and rights to reprint. Are you there, Frida?
Yeah, yes, I'm here.
Hi. What was your question, love?
Yeah, so I just saw a comment from Christina about she owned she owns her copyright, and I would like to own the copyright on what I'd like to publish in future. So just wanted to check if that is a done thing, because I have seen other authors try to get rights to reprint because a book publisher will not print. And I think successfully they've done that.
I think you just need to,
yeah, Emily,
you just need to have a look at the contract.
Are you a writer, Frida?
Yes, I'm a food writer.
Yes.
I
what it normally would be the situation is that you, as the writer of the recipes and other material in the book, are the copyright holder of that. But what you do is that you license the publishing rights to the publisher, but you would always be the copyright holder unless there was a reason that you weren't the copyright holder, if you see what I mean.
Okay, all right.
The writer is the copy, it is your copy, you have written it, and the copyright belongs to you.
But you're not free to do what you want with that material, are you, Heather?
No, because you've licensed the publishing rights to a publisher, and then all the agreement to do with that is within the contract between you, the author, and the book publisher. That makes sense.
And if you do
Yeah.
really republish it, then the photography in particular is like, unless you're paying the photographer up front out of your own pocket, that's going to be a separate thing. So yeah, if that's what you want to do, if you want to own the book outright to be able to do anything, then you need to make sure you own the photography as well at the beginning.
Yeah.
That's where I have to just step in and say that as far as self-publishing can be the bane of your existence, like you're responsible for every little thing. The beautiful flip side is you're responsible for every little thing. So I mean, my photographer is my daughter, so I can make her do whatever I want. No, that's not true. But so I definitely, I mean, she's a paid, she was a paid photographer for both of my books, but if I need her to do more, or if I want her to tweak something, or then the graphic designer is my employee. I hired her and we can talk about the design. The printer is my employee. I've paid their bill. So obviously self-publishing is a horrible burden in many ways, but on the other hand, you're in control of every single aspect of everything that happens, and every page looks exactly the way you wanted it. And then going forward, you're in control of everything. So it's definitely a flip side of good news, bad news. I mean, self-publishing.
Yeah, I do like the sound of that, the control, but let's see.
Yeah.
You're brave.
Yeah.
Right.
It has its moments. I mean,
so I don't think there's anything else from this group listed. Did you have some from the Facebook forum? Was there any questions on there or not?
I think there was a more general thing. Was it you, Frida, that was asking? You've been quoted a large sum of money about the cost of, who was it? Was that you that was asking about that?
Yes, it was me.
Yeah, that for self-publishing, was it between $17,000 and $35,000?
Yes, I think if my memory serves me well, that was what was said, and I was wondering how do you budget that? Where does that go?
I would say from the point of view of this particular workshop, promotion would be a pretty small part of that, because you'd hope that you would kind of, you might, I suppose, pay someone to take some extra photographs or something, but I suppose most of that would be on the material and the photographs to do the book. But I don't know, you guys might have more opinion on whether that's a realistic target for the whole book. Kristen?
From my point of view, that's just, I can't understand that range. I mean, it seems like one number and then twice that number. So I don't really understand why what the help would be of that range. But I would say the bottom of the range is just about what it costs for me to self-publish my 2 book-sized books that involved a super graphic designer, a really good, reputable printer, photography. I wrote the index myself. Yeah, so that lowest number is kind of where we came in. So I don't know how you'd spend twice that, but and promotion was all purely self-generated and free for that matter. So it was just a matter of work and hours. So
maybe was it both of your books soft cover, Kristen? Because I don't know,
kind of
hardcover and kind of fancy with foils and end papers and stuff might add.
Oh, maybe so. They were soft, like glossy, matte, like a nice quality with a flaps on the back and front, so that you could have bios and endorsements and things like that. So I suppose if you did hardcover, but this was one of the problems with getting a real publisher is that the photographs are so expensive to print. And at least my book, I could say I want a photograph for every single recipe. So, but I don't know, Frida, what do you think? How are you going to go forward?
I'm not sure, but all I can say is right now I'm trying to write my book without pitching it, because I want it to go in the direction that I want it to go. Whether it's good or not, I feel like I must do it myself and then see what happens. So I don't know yet.
Good for you. Good luck.
Thank
you. Best of luck.
I'm impressed with your determination. Lovely. Well, I think if that's it, then thank you all so much for coming. I hope you found it helpful. It will be available at some point on the Guild YouTube channel to watch again. And thank you to all of our panelists, to Kristen, to Matt, and to Emily for giving up some of their evening to be with us, and to Julie for organising it. I think that was a great event. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask a really dumb technology question? Julie, will the chat be available later, or when the call ends, does the chat disappear?
That I don't know the answer to.
Okay, because being part of it, I couldn't follow the chat as it went by because we were chatting, but I'd love to see what people had said, but I don't know if that's possible after the call is over.
You can save it, Kristen, because I've just done that because I haven't been following the chat. So you can, if you go to the ellipsis sign on the chat, there's a save.
Okay.
button. So
brilliant. Okay.
If not, maybe I might be able to send it to you, but I'm not
There's
sure.
been lots of love for your website, Matthew. Let me just say that.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see. So many authors. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks all. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Felicity. Thanks, Julie. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
To save the chat before we close.
No idea. Pretty sad.